And joining us is Mr. Pradeep Kashyap. I know you as the evangelist of rural marketing in India. You're also the president of the Rural Marketing Association of India and the CEO of MART. Thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure.
First of all, 2012, the market itself. Tell us about the rural marketing landscape itself in India and what this means for categories and specific brands.
We have three Indias. India 1 is the top 48 cities, which account for only 25% of the purchasing power of GDP. Then we have 7,800 small towns, which account for another 25% of India's GDP or purchasing power. And finally, we have 640,000 villages, which account for 50% of India's wealth. If you look at the size of the Indian market, and I'll go straight to rural, just rural India is now a $1 trillion market, which means on relative terms, it is equal to the size of Canada's economy. Horizontally, also there are three rural Indias. So you have the developed rural India, which are states like Punjab, Haryana, Maharashtra, Gujarat, and then you have the least developed states, which are the Bimaru states, the Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, Orissa, Rajasthan, UP, and the rest of them, the ones in the middle. Right? So that's the macro scenario.
Despite those numbers, do you see the kind of traction that you would expect from big brands?
The traditional rural marketing companies like Unilever, ITC, Eveready, they've always been present for the last 40, 50 years, and they're the ones who have really reaped the benefit as being the early entrants into the rural market. Look at it this way, that Unilever gets about 50% of its business from rural India. So if they had not opened up this market 30, 40 years back, they would be half the size of the company that they are today. Same story for ITC and for many others. 50% of the sale of motorcycles for Hero MotoCorp comes from rural India. Maruti started their rural business only 4 years back. 4 years back they were getting almost 0% share. Today they get 27% share, which is their total production is more than 1 million cars. So 270,000 cars are sold in rural India. And when I'm talking rural, I'm talking of villages. I'm not talking about small towns. That's another market. And I think when we look at the rural market, we need to club these two markets. The rural market, which accounts for 50% of GDP, and the small town market.
The 25%.
25%, so 75% market. For every 100 villages, there is a town. So it is a hub and spoke model. And the more small towns develop, the more roads networks develop, these are going to get integrated, and that is what is going to give traction. See, earlier most small-scale industry was located in Delhi, Mumbai and the big cities. Then because of environmental reasons, all these were pushed out of these big cities and into smaller towns. So these small towns have now become the new engines of growth. And a lot of GDP is now being created in these small towns. Amul saw this opportunity in small towns. They've opened up 7,000 ice cream parlors in the 1,500 out of these 7,000 odd towns. And last year they got an additional business of 500 crores for ice creams, just ice creams, because that's what they sell from there. And their total portfolio for ice cream maybe, I imagine, about 2,000 crores. So they've got 25% additional business in 1 year, and they've decided to open up another 3,000 outlets this year.
The whole perception of companies going into rural areas to do business is often looked upon very skeptically. The rural population actually appreciates somebody coming in with a business model, but having inclusivity within that business model.
Yes. As far as business is concerned, we have to accept that the purpose of a corporate is to make profits. But if they can make profits by doing good, then so much the better. And then they would get the sympathy and the support of the local people. I think Tata is one brand which comes to my mind where they have tremendous equity in rural India because they've done so much good for rural society, with the result that people just end up buying Tata brands with their eyes closed because they have that sympathy with the Tata brand. But you're right that companies need to engage with rural communities, and the government, the private sector and the communities need to engage together. The problem is, so far, it is the government and the private sector which have been trying to engage with each other, and they both come with different agendas. And what the two of them don't seem to realize is that who is this engagement for? It is for the community. And also ultimately, it is the community which must decide what we need for our villages.
We've had several instances and successful instances like Hindustan Unilever, ITC, Colgate.
Project Shakti of Unilever, it's a wonderful example of how the community, private sector and the government work together for a win-win. The women wanted to earn more income. So Unilever decided to appoint them as dealers, and they have doubled their income by selling Unilever products. Unilever has got the advantage that they've been able to penetrate their products deeper, and they've now got an additional business of about 15,000 coming out of this channel for rural India. NABARD, which is the national bank, has got the advantage that more and more women are taking loans, and the purpose of a bank is to give money on loans so that they can make their profits out of it by getting interest. The state governments have been working hard towards finding sustainable livelihoods for the poor. And here comes Unilever or a company or ITC who have now provided these sustainable livelihoods for the poor. So when all of them have come together, then the model has become successful. But it was the community which was at the center of these successful models. So whether it is Echopal or it is Unilever or it is Colgate or Novartis or many other models. So I think the way to go forward is to keep the community at the center and develop a co-creation model using the community to begin with.
When we talk about projects done by big brands, the next question is scaling up these projects. And in a heterogeneous country, especially within this rural infrastructure, how do you manage that?
You must build, scale up right from the pilot stage. It should not happen that you do a retrofit after you've done a successful pilot, then you say, oh, I now need to scale up, so how do I do it? And then I find that I don't have the right kind of ingredients to scale up.
So go in with a long-term focus.
Yes. In India, we have an ASHA worker, a health worker in every village. The postman delivers letters in every village to every home. Nowhere in the world, in Europe or in America, are letters delivered to the last home. One of the reasons why Unilever went along with us on Project Shakti was that they were not required to make any investments upfront on the distribution logistics. The same thing with Echopal. You already have these farmers. All you had to do was train one of them to become your local contact.
Do you think that it's an easier route to follow, going the usual traditional advertising marketing route rather than setting up something which is long term?
See, as you rightly said, India is the size of Europe. Okay? Every state is as big as any country anywhere in the world. So we will have to have region-specific strategies. Okay? The success of Ghadi, which has now become the single largest detergent brand ahead of Wheel in the country, is simply this. They have mapped the quality of water in each state, and they sell in only 4 or 5 states. So UP, MP, Rajasthan, and 1 or 2 other states, Gujarat. And their formulation is according to the destination of that product. So if the water is hard there, they will add more softener. If the water is soft, they don't need to add that softener, right? So they have customized their product. That is one. Similarly, you have to customize your communication because the language is different, the cultures are different, the understanding is different, even the ecosystem is different. The one reason why multinational companies have not done half as well as regional brands in this country is because multinational companies believe that what sells in 80 other countries will also succeed in this country.
Well, the reality is that if you don't take this market seriously, then you're not here for the long term. That's it,
I've
right?
always said that companies that fail to move into the rural market now will do so at their own peril. If I look at 2013-14, the fastest growth is now coming out of rural India. You take the FMCG as a category, it grew by about 11% in urban India, 18% in rural India. Boston Consulting Group, I think, has come out with a report which says that by 2020, the market for FMCGs in rural India will grow 360%, whereas in urban India it will grow only 200%. Durables, 12% growth in urban India last year, or the previous year, 27% growth in rural India, again on the same base. 50-50. So rural India is now has reached that inflection point because 70% of our villages are now connected by all-weather road. The biggest challenge always was, how do I reach my product to rural India? Now these 70% villages account for 90% of the population and 95% of the purchasing power. So it means you almost covered it. 60 million televisions in rural India, which account for 80% of rural wealth. So when we talk about electricity, 60% of households now have electricity. Of course, it's another matter that the quality of availability of electricity is still not that good.
Projections for 2013-14. What growth are you seeing overall, if I was to ask you, in rural marketing in India?
See, if you look at the GDP projected growth, it's around 6.5%. I would imagine that rural will get a higher share of the 6.5%. So therefore, rural may grow 8-9%. And some of the categories that are growing very rapidly in rural India, if I take durables first, then it's a two-wheeler market, particularly motorcycles, cars. Of course, tractors is 100% coming from rural. If I take the consumer FMCGs, I'd already mentioned to you shampoos. Packaged food products, very interestingly, is beginning to grow very rapidly.
Why is that?
Because now both husband and wife are working. And as I think, I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, that with much better road connectivity to the nearby town, more and more people from rural India are taking up jobs in that nearby town. And I just need to conclude this by again giving you a macro picture. So rural India is a pyramid, 800 million people. 400 million people are at the base of the pyramid, earning less than $1 a day. 350 million people in the middle of the pyramid, earning $1 to $5 per day per capita, per person. And then 50 million people at the top of the pyramid, the rich, who are earning more than $5 a day. By 2020, this pyramid is going to morph into a diamond. Okay? And the rich are going to go up from 50 to 150 million people, 3 times. And the poor are going to shrink from 400 million to 250 million. And 150 million of these people are going to get pushed up to the middle income. These 150 million people will be first-time users of brands. So they offer a huge opportunity to companies like Unilever and others who are into mass brands, Dabur and many others, because 150 million new consumers. And at the premium brand category, you will have these 100 million additional people who will be buying premium brands like Dove. So that's a big opportunity there. There's a big opportunity here. In fact, never, even in China in 1 decade, has such a transformation happened.
Actually, that's a great note to end, because by 2030, India is supposedly going to beat China in its population,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
However, the difference between India and China is, I believe, the growth in China is largely urban, but the growth in India is largely going to be rural.
Absolutely. And therefore, India will continue to remain a fairly insulated economy because ours will be a domestic-driven consumption story.
Domestically driven market, largely driven by rural India.
Absolutely.
On that note, Mr. Kashyap, thank you very much for joining us.